So welcome everybody to this session of the Literary Lounge featuring Eric and Ngalle Charles, joining us today from Wales. Um, it's a real privilege to invite Eric to be on this show, and Eric has had the most incredible journey as a person and as a poet as well. You know, through a lot of hardships and an incredible sort of eventual triumph, as I like to say. It begins in Cameroon leaving Cameroon at the age of 17 or 18, and then finding his way to Wales through some tumultuous years in Russia. And for me, Eric embodies an indomitable spirit, which manifests through his storytelling and poetry, with an unyielding, invictus spirit, which is inspirational to say the least. I was very lucky to read with Eric in an event in Swansea last year at the university, and just hearing him read was just, was an experience altogether. We'll begin this show. So this is a round of applause to Eric from all of us over here. And we'll begin this show with a video which Eric has kindly shared with us, which he's taking to festivals across the UK, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I will forgive me about technology. I'm really terrible with technology. So is everybody able to see this? Can you see this, Eric?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Brilliant.
Tata mawelon jiana jialene Wamanu kotomuli mekuli kuli rikwearu Rina mokomoli mekuli kuli rina kwearu
Rene na juju kena mevembe wane ya enere ya maungo. Today, I drown in my sleep, here in exile, while strangers build thrones on my father's grave. Jie, 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 mokona mono. This is not a poem, and I am not a person, so don't worry. Consider this. You are many people in one. A father, a mother, a daughter, a son, rounded by all you have seen, the sum of all you have done. I grew up in Cameroon, where on the wall of my mother's living room, a gecko waited patiently for the moth. How my spirit craved to sit on top of a hill. My mother warned me. My father, he warned me. They said, when you reach the top of the hill, do not sigh. Do not show any signs of tiredness. On top of the hill, I sighed. I took a deep breath. I was tired. That was when I saw Jukuke and his friend Mevomba, who took me away. I was weak. I was a boy, my bones soft. The judge banged his gavel and shouted, Mankama, Mankama, exile, exile. Have you ever thought about the moment of having to leave? Everything you have known, abandoned? Seeing one's mother cry is never a good sight. You begin to wonder how bad things really are. She gave each of my fingers a gentle bite, paying tribute to an old village adage, nothing unsealing the fact that, as I struggle to climb, the thoughts and prayers of my relatives will be with me, as mine will be with them. Mamuchka, nie skuchajesz, ja wernus, jasna jutoczna, może dniem, może nocy, wy mnie nie zabywaj. Mamuchka, nie skuchajesz, ja wernus, jasna jutoczna, może dniem, może nocy, wy mnie nie zabywaj. From Cameroon to Russia to Wales, a place called Wales. What is Wales? That day, I prayed in a tongue I did not understand, in a language I did not speak. I do not remember my dreams. The sun's rays avoid my skin. My shoes have holes. I paid my debts 1,000 times to those who planned to kill me. Welcome. Can you prove you are destitute? Destitute, from the Latin forsaken, deprived, absolutely without dignity, without the basics of life, without power, without everything, just with barely enough to survive. An animal in the forest will hunt, but an asylum seeker may not. Just wait, toothless, endlessly repeating their story, repetition of their trauma, to persuade, to the government officials, to the caseworker, to the solicitor, should they be lucky enough to have one. Every personal detail of attack or persecution repeated, so they can never forget. Have a story for them, but keep one for yourself. After 2 weeks in a forest, a hunter comes across a skull. He steps on the skull, and the skull speaks, saying, "My mouth brought me here." The hunter looks around thinking he was hallucinating. He steps on the skull again, and the skull speaks, saying, "My mouth brought me here." The hunter turns around and runs towards the village at extreme speed. He comes into the king's chamber, knocks the guards out of the way, and enters into the king's palace, demanding to see the king. The commotion brings the king out, and the king laughs. "So what brought you here?" And the hunter explains, "After 2 weeks in the forest, I came across a skull. I stepped on it, and the skull speaks, saying, 'My mouth brought me here.'" Now, it's a taboo to tell lies in this society. The consequences of telling lies is decapitation. So you are telling me that after 2 weeks in the forest, you came across a skull, and you stepped on the skull, and the skull spoke, saying, "My mouth brought me here." The hunter insisted, yes, he saw the skull. So the king gathers his hunters, some guards, some guns, some bow.
So, can anybody, is there a problem with the screen?
There was, so Shazad, there was. I don't know if, did it fix just before you stopped it? It fixed for me. Did it fix for everybody?
It fixed for me too.
Okay. So I'll just go back.
Just start it again. It was just a few minutes.
and arrows, and together with the hunter, they returned into the forest. And lo and behold, they came across the skull. The hunter steps on the skull. Silence. He steps on the skull again. Complete silence. He steps on it for the third time, the fourth time, nothing happens. The king got agitated. He pulls out a sword and decapitates the hunter. His head was placed next to the previous head. In the middle of the night, when all was quiet, the first head turns and looks at the hunter's head and says, "You see, I told you, my mouth brought me here." I grew up in a village at the foot of Mount Fako, surrounded by love until exile. But the memory of love makes exile bearable. And when I landed in Wales on colonial winds, I was welcomed. And now I have spent half of my time on this earth as a stranger in a strange country. I discovered a hybrid state, colonial in its way, like Cameroon, where first the Portuguese dipped a toe, and then the Germans, English, and French reached out their grasp. Without Wales, cockroaches, worms, the underbelly of life would have eaten me whole. Now, I can never engage in a conversation about belonging without speaking about my new roots in Wales. Wales gave me back my name and voice, and thanks to it, my mother no longer cries at night. This is not a poem, and I am not a person, so don't worry. It is many poems and many people in one. A father, a mother, a daughter, a son, weathered by all you've seen, the sum of all you've done. We all seek, switch, shared, long for identities, defining a lifetime, a day, or a few months. They protect or enslave us, free and betray us. They are labels sought, labels bequeathed, labels chosen, or labels enforced. In some societies, silence is gold, talking is silver. In some societies, you can survive a fall from a 9-story building, but die from answering a simple question, yes or no. A punch takes you to the floor. It is painful, but at least you feel. Even a prison cell is somewhere. The news. It says we have taken your jobs, your homes, your history, as if we are an enemy. I don't have a face, if that's all I am. Feeling sorry for me with vouchers as in child's play. Buying food in a supermarket where witnesses point a finger. Clarify intent, teach truth in history. Then they may not laugh at me. When a stranger comes to your home, should they feel ashamed? Heaven is such a beautiful word. Would you put your arms around the dead child on the beach if you could? Or turn away, the salt air still in your senses?
Rolling a wimba,
Imagine if we could be proud of the word refugee, or giving refuge, or see compassion as strength, not weakness.
Ma maman est française, mais j'habite à Cardiff.
I'm half Irish and half Welsh.
My parents are from India, but my home is in Wales.
Ako ang Pinoy.
Meu papa est
Jestem
espagnol.
z
I am
Polski.
Welsh and
Mamma è
Spanish.
Hispana, familia
Jestem z Polski.
familia
I am Welsh, but my friends are from all over the world.
My name is Eric Ngalle. I am a Bakweri boy. But although half my placenta is buried in the shadows of Mount Cameroon, I now belong to Wales. I am between a mountain and a sea. The mountain, like a giant slate with trees keeping vigil, like Yomandene, the guardian, the mountain where my grandmother lived after her death, a mountain of broken hearts. Migration, memory, and trauma remain deep in the abyss of my heart. When the journey of the refugee is over, the pain remains. I had gathered firewood in my mind. I needed a rope to tie it and carry it home. I found my place in poetry. When I first heard a great poet in school, he said, "Ngalle, jump." And I jumped so high, I didn't come down for days. It has taken me 16 years, and I still have not finished writing my own last memory of the streets that first formed me. I have been back to Cameroon and my village, where there are neither street names nor signs, and where all the men are dead, where the Jujuman reigns and all death is witchcraft. In Cameroon, our mothers are our fathers. The jackfruit tree whose shadow darkened my mother's kitchen is no longer there, but the country stands divided on old colonial lines, and anger boils. When two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Grass is dying in Cameroon. But I am nomad everywhere but Wales. In Wales, I say, Diok Unvaurian, Neki, Tengi Rai Rai. I now have a double longing for the home where I was born and the one in which I live. He rieth, a rolly, a longing like that one feels after death for a loved one. Still, sometimes, I plead with passing birds to carry me to you. But I place my shadow gently into a cupboard.
Jembaleka, Jembaleka, Jembaleka tati wone. Jembaleka, Jembaleka, Jembaleka tati wone. I heard their wailings first as rumors. I heard them far, far away upon my countless wanderings, crossing seas, climbing mountains, seeking peace and finding none. For it was the first and the last time she left work just to be with me. She avoided my gaze. When I looked at her, I noticed she was crying. You know, seeing one's mother cry is never a good sign. Jembaleka, Jembaleka, Jembaleka tati wone. Jembaleka, Jembaleka, Maybe, just maybe, staying home was the best option. Still avoiding my gaze, she took my hands into her hands, and one by one, she gave each of my fingers a gentle bite, paying tribute to a village adage that wherever I go, the ancestors will be with me, and I will be with them. Little did they know I would end up in Russia. You see, my late sister's husband, he was there. My friend Victor, Kulu, they were there happy for me, thinking I was brave. Internally, I was dying of apprehension and nostalgia, but most of all, the fear of never seeing my mother again. You see, when I first took refuge here in Wales, I wanted to tell my Welsh friend why Pichapniki in Moscow had become a cesspool of crime. I wanted to tell him why I had left my country at such haste, why I had crossed seas, seeking peace and finding none. It was as if a mysterious courier had placed its hands on my friend's shoulder. My Welsh friend said to me, Ngalle, Sharia Kamrai? I said, Zim, doing Hofi, Riok Sharia Kamrai. My Welsh friend said, witnesses like you should stand over there facing the public gallery. You should not divide yourself between the judge, the jury, the prosecution, or the defense. He said, in some societies, silence is gold. In some societies, talking is silver. In some societies, one can survive a fall from a 14-story building, but answering yes or no to a question is tantamount to decapitation. In some societies, he said, the king flashes his genitalia to his people. Yes, it was as if a mysterious courier had conveyed to my Welsh friend what was taking place in my internal court of justice. But he said, Ngalle, in some societies, when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffer. In Syria, he said, the elephants were fighting. In Darfur, the elephants are fighting. In Eritrea, the elephants are fighting. In Yemen, the elephants are fighting. Here in Wales, he said, Croeso, your lights will shine and not under the gallows. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was amazing, Eric. So much to unpack there, but we'd love to hear a few more poems if that's okay. I mean,
Amara Chuku, my iron lady, is watching us from Nigeria. Let me just say hi.
Hello, Eric. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
good afternoon. We're just wondering if we can put everyone on mute for now, and then we'll sort of recap at the end of the show.
All right, so thank you very much, Sheza, for this opportunity. I'm going to share with you some few points, and I'll be reading from my latest publications, The Three Molars. The Three Molars. It's a collaboration between myself, Ivor Abglin, the National Poet of Wales, and Mike Jenkins, the poet laureate. So this poem is called Warning to a Stubborn Child, and it introduces itself in Bakwiri through a song. Mama mawelo njiya Tata mawelo njiya Wamanu kato moli mekoli ribeyahu. Rina moko moli mekoli rina beyahu. Rina ne juju kena mevembe wane ya eneri. Yamango. My mother warned me. My father, he warned me. They said, Ngalle, when you reach on top of the hill, do not sigh. Do not show any signs of tiredness. On top of the hill, I sighed. I took deep breath. I was tired. That was when I saw Jukuke and his friend Mevumba, who took me away. I was tired, weak. I was a boy, my bones soft. The judge banged his gavel. He shouted, Man kama, man kama. Exile, exile. Do you mean exile, as in the case of the Molikili, the stick insect, who died and resurrected herself from death to question the grave diggers and the mourners why she wasn't washed, or why she was buried in dirty clothes? Do you mean exile, as in the case of Mowbray, said Thomas Mowbray? Alas, the part I had in Woodstock's blood Not solicits me that your exclaims to stare against the butchers of his life, but since correction lies in those hands which made the fault, place with our quarrels in the wheels of heaven, whom when they see the hours ripe on earth, will rain hot vengeance on the offender's head. Or dreaming exile, as in beyond the village gates, to cross seas, to climb seas, climbing mountains, seeking peace and finding none. In my flight, I saw my grandmother. She was rearranging the flowers on my grave. She said, Ngalle was here. Ngalle is no more. In my flight, I saw young boys, I saw young girls dancing barefoot in the rain of my dreams and my broken landscape. I saw bees pregnant with nectar.
Sorry, if you can speak a little more closer to the mic. Because I think there's an audio, I think your audio is a bit low.
In my flight, I saw bees pregnant with nectar carrying me home away from exile. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was 1 hour anyway. And you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was invited by the Home Office to come and do translation for someone who just came from French Cameroon. And you know, when you are doing these translations, you are not allowed to laugh. But the question that was given to this character and the response that he gave, I could not help myself but laugh. So they asked this guy, so why did you come to Britain? And he said, I came here because of the food. Now so I started laughing and we had to stop the proceedings because as a Cameroonian, there is no way you leave Cameroon to go somewhere else just for food because our kitchen is unique and diverse. So this poem again is from the Three Molars. Okay. And it's called My Favorite Food. Bring me kwakoku, bring me mbanga soup, bring me ekwang or achu soup. These are my favorite food. I promise on the first night, we shall dance. On the second night, we shall fill our stomach with early morning palm wine. Again, we shall dance. You drink the rest, I'll drink the dregs. On the third night, as the sun drifts, as the moon shows its face, we shall hold hands. I will chant in Sufi mystics as slowly we disappear behind the hills of Trioki. Okay. And a poem that depicts the colonial divide and the current conflict in Cameroon. This is called Utopia. Slowly, I drag the carpet under the tyrant's feet. Beneath the shattered wall of Boyer's blood, I lament. My tears I bring as sacrifice to the wild beast waiting at my doorstep. Whispers in the wind, I hear words like pebbles pressing my breastbone. Oh, I was ready. Today, I must learn to be a virgin, to dance with the rain as it plays with my window. For too long, I have stayed in this deserted house. My tears a sacrifice to the wild beast waiting at my doorstep, deleting my memories one by one. You know, until 2013, I was caught up behind this idea of languages. But from 2013, I kind of found my voice. And I only discovered my voice when I followed the music of my rains back to my mother's kitchen. So I'm going to do 2 more poems, but this one again introduces itself in my language, Bakwiri.
Okay, but Eric, 1 second. Is everybody able to hear all right, just to know?
Yeah, perfect for me.
Okay, brilliant.
Oh, Sudeep says not so well, I think.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this poem is called
maybe a bit louder, if that's okay. Because the volume seems to be a bit off today for some reason.
No worries, no worries. So this is the last ritual. Umawe mbundi wake Mina mawu na manganeko. Omawe mbundi wake. Mina mawu na manganeko. Iwonya eko wahi wama. Iye jie. Jie mokona muno. Iwonya eko wahi wama. Jie jie. Jie mokona muno. It is because of you that the gods are chasing us with bows and arrows. It is because of you that we jump, skipping ropes. It is because of you. My ways are not your ways, and my days are not your days. I will not think of you one way or the other. Didn't you grotesquely place a wall between my father, my sister, my brothers, and I? No, I will not think of you one way or the other. For that day, I spoke in a language I did not understand. I prayed in a tongue I did not know. Rain bouncing on my back, sun rays avoid my skin, living as a stranger amongst my own, I cry. I do not remember my name. My dreams, they avoid me. My shoes have holes. I paid my debts 1,000 times to those who plan to kill me. See, this is my grave. This is my grave. I stand here on a field of daffodils. I am waiting for you. I am waiting for you to bury me. Thank you very much.
That was lovely. So I had a few questions for you, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So you spoke about the word Hirayat in the poem itself, and it seems to be very sort of crucial and central in your poetics from what I understand. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Hirayat is a wonderful word. It's a wonderful Welsh word, and its equivalent in my language is a rolly rolly. You know, it is Hirayat in its simple form. For me, it's a song that I play in my head over and over again, so I do not forget. You know, but in terms of Welsh balance and Welsh understanding, it is that concept of home that you've created an ideal in your head, and you kind of constantly rebuild this home so that you do not forget. But for me, the importance of this word Hirayat comes from its opposite in Bakuri, a rolly rolly. So from the video, you hear my daughter was singing, a rolly rolly no wimbai, a rolly rolly no wimbai. So a rolly rolly is a wonderful thing where after 6 months of me living in Russia, a terrible incident happened. My mom received this news, but my mom was told that her son had died. So for the following year, my mom will be sitting in the kitchen and she'll be singing this a rolly rolly. In this context, then it means a mother crying for the child that she loved, knowing fully well that this child would never return. So this is why I like these two. These are my favorite, a rolly rolly and the concept of Hirayat. You know, as someone who lives in Wales, it took me 17 years to go back to my home. So over these 17 years, I was remodeling my home through the various memories that I had created to this perfect Hirayat. When I went home for the first time in 2017, it wasn't as perfect as I had created.
Okay. And so when you went back, home, obviously now as a sort of very established star in the UK, what was the reaction like in Cameroon towards that, and how do you see like the literary scene in Cameroon now?
It is vibrating, but there is this ceiling, you know, up until A levels. By the time one does A levels in Cameroon, you can regurgitate Shakespeare, you can regurgitate Tennyson, but we do not know who Cameroonian writers are. So there is that level of elitism. So when I went to Cameroon for the first time in 2017, I wanted to introduce myself to the Cameroonian literati, showing them how Wales have kind of adopted me. So I went to the Ministry of Arts and Culture to introduce myself because I had a letter from our ambassador here. I was at the Ministry of Arts and Culture for 2 hours. Later, the secretary comes to me and says, you know, the minister has just had his lunch. So he's actually sleeping now, so you can't see him. But whilst I was there, this renowned journalist walks in, and it turns out that she had been following a little publication that I was doing on Facebook. So she took my telephone number and she introduced me to Mr. Charles Tembe. Charles Tembe does a program in Cameroon called Literary Half Hour, which has an audience of 7 million people. So through these little coincidences, this is how I introduced myself to the Cameroonian literati. So, but I'm from the south of Cameroon, which is the English side of Cameroon. Most Cameroonian literature is dictated by the French Cameroon. So there is this, it's not such an equilibrium. So if you look at Cameroonian literature now, it is there's that constant struggle, anti-colonial stance, anti-French stance. It's like a protest kind of thing. But what I've introduced now is this kind of mentorship where we have schools for young writers, and thanks to Arts Council of Wales, I can help to subsidize people's income. So if you told somebody in Cameroon that you are a writer, the other question will be, are you a journalist? These are things that we are working on, but there is hope. There is hope. I do not.
Okay, and so when you were growing up in Cameroon, were there any sort of stories or poetry that sort of found root in you that you sort of started to compel you to start writing?
I'll be honest with you, right? My brother, when I was 8 years old, my brother introduced me to a wonderful book called The Swahili Songs of Love and Passion. This book was written in Swahili and translated into English. So I loved this book so much so that one evening I told my mother that I had written a poem for her. You know, so my mother was excited that her son is a writer. So she invited my sisters and my brother in the kitchen, and they were sitting down. They said, "Okay, Ngalle, read this poem to us." And the poem goes like, "Dearest mother, you are as beautiful as Siberia. Everybody knows where you are. No one dares." So my mother left the kitchen. She went into the room and packed my little bag and kicked me out of her house. That was my first exile because she interpreted the poem as being a single mother and some different men coming in and out of her life. She thought I was making a mockery of her. You know, so that wasn't it. That wasn't it. I was just complimenting her. In terms of stories, in Bakwiri, we have this insect, and I'm fascinated by it. It is called the molikilikili.
Okay.
In English, it is called the stick insect. So no matter where you are in the village, there's always a huge tree. And on the side of this tree, there's always this stick insect. It looks like it is doing press-ups on the side of the tree. So it is always there. So one day, the millipede was going to the market. So the millipede notices the molikilikili on this tree. So it stops and inquires as to what the molikilikili was doing. So the molikilikili says, "You see, this tree has been here for 400 years. It's blocking my sun. My fruits are not germinating. So I am going to push this tree until it falls to the ground." So the millipede shakes its head and says, "Listen, how tiny your hands are. Look at how tiny your legs are. By the time you push this tree to the ground, you'll be dead. Your generation will be dead. Everybody will be dead. This tree will still be here." So the millipede goes to the market. 6 months later, on its way back, it comes, and this molikilikili is still on this tree, pushing it. So the stick insect, the millipede does something that we have done, and it goes, "Enulia mato, enulia miro, narawea wea wea ma molikilikama." So the stick insect prays to the gods and begs them to render it blind and deaf so that it shouldn't see what the stick insect is trying to do to this tree. So when I came to Wales all those years ago, and I was invited to a conference in Clandino, and I met a woman called Fazana. So they were saying, "Oh, Eric, can you come and stand on the stage and tell us about your memories or how you got to be in Wales?" But I didn't understand what aspect of my memory I should be telling this audience. Should I tell you why, as a young man, I had left my village at such haste? Should I tell you how I became a victim of human trafficking and ended up in Russia? Or should I tell you how I came to Wales to a 63-year-old Zimbabwean when I was only 21? So I didn't know. But Fazana came on stage, and Fazana told us that she was a victim of human trafficking. She left Afghanistan via Uzbekistan to go to Turkey. But when they arrived Uzbekistan, Fazana's father died. So in order to pay the human traffickers, Fazana's mother allowed herself, and the human traffickers were ejaculating all over her. So by the time they reached Turkey, Fazana's mother became blind. So when she told this story, I went back to the earliest memory of the sticking sick and the molikili. Then I asked myself this question: can blindness be desired? Can blindness be desired? If so, what have those eyes seen to desire to see no more? And that was my trigger.
Okay. So I'm just going. So I remember your festival, like in Edinburgh, when you came for a reading there. I remember this line very strongly. I do not care for the voices of my ancestors to rescue me. I am hellbound of that I am certain. And
Yes.
then that's from your play, right? The last ritual. Was that?
Oh no, Death on the Third Floor, I think.
Yeah, that something. So could you go a bit more about that?
Are those not shadows lurking in the place I once called home? Underneath this kitchen is our family shrine. Behind this kitchen is my father's grave. My auntie, my sisters, they will be joining him soon. I do not care for the voices of my ancestors to rescue me. I am hellbound of that, I am certain. Yesterday you loved me. Today your faces mask so much disdain, so much hatred. How long have you been planning this? Did we not fish in the streams of Morit together? Did we not climb the hills of Welly together? See, as I stood there, a can of petrol in one hand, a box of matches in the other hand, gazing at my father's house with deadly intent, madness in my soul. Even the night was silent, as if it were holding its breath. And the moon could not bear to watch as it hid behind angry clouds, the likes of which seldom trouble African skies. But as I stepped forward to set the wheels in motion that will carry me into damnation, I could hear my mother's voice piercing through the cloud. My mother spoke to me in the voices of my ancestors and those before her. My mother spoke. See, I turned around and I followed my mother's voice towards her house, but there was no new dawn slipping through the horizon. You see, my mother's voice may have halted my actions on that day, but I, Motimbili, the one who comes and goes, I, Yomandene, the guardian on the mountain where my grandmother lived upon her death, the mountain of broken heart, I, Ngalle, I'll have my revenge in this life and not wait for the next. So I thought, you see, that poem, this is something that happened in the early years, the early months of 1997. And I was prepared to burn my father's house to the ground with everyone that was in it. You see, but I had my own plans, and the gods of my ancestors had their own plans. So instead of me going through with this arson and murder, they flung me to Russia.
So life has taken you in a very sort of different and better, I mean, in a very sort of different direction now. And you're in Wales, and so how's the transition coming into Wales, and how's the sort of the local scene helped you sort of help you out in that sense?
You know, when I came to Wales all those years ago, you know, everybody wants to speak on your behalf, but the people that I met kind of set the standards for my life. So I met the famous writer who was head of BBC at the time, Mr. Graham Davies. I met Professor Tom Cheeseman, who's the head of the German language department in Swansea. I met Mr. Peter Finch. So these are the people that I met, but I didn't think of myself as a writer. I didn't know that I could write. But something strange happened in 2001, in the June of 2001, and it is the title of this book, Between a Mountain and a Sea. So we're traveling back from North Wales in a place called Llandudno, back into Swansea, you know, and I have been struggling to delete all my memories of home, the memories of what happened in Russia, the memories of what my father's family did to me, in Wales, I was trying to forge this new identity, but I had not found my voice until this particular day. And as we were traveling on the, I think it's A41 or something, I saw the Slate Mountain, I saw the sheep grazing, and my conversation with Professor Tom Cheeseman was on common things. But there was such a similarity between what I saw in North Wales and where I was growing up in Cameroon. But then I started thinking to myself, maybe I had arrived. And it triggered this poem, and the poem is called A Mountain and a Sea. A story from a distance. They were my only witness, a mountain and a sea, whose lips engulfed the green sky, a lasting kiss, washing her waves offshore, leaving behind a boat. That for my homecoming. The mountain, like a giant slave with trees keeping vigils, like relatives awaiting their departed children. A giant gaze looking down at me, like Yo Mandene, the guardian, the mountain where my grandmother lived after her death, a mountain of broken hearts. That for my homecoming. A shining mountain where sheep grazed, by which means my heart rejoiced. That for my homecoming. On a wet journey to Plandidno, washing away pain and longing, a reborn voice is crying between a mountain and a sea, where voices echoed across horizons and conversations on common things. Wake me from my slumber, and this poem will be over between a mountain and a sea. That for my homecoming. So that is the very first poem I wrote in 2000, and it set the benchmark. But it wasn't. I was surrounded by people who welcomed me, and then they told me what that guy said in the poem. Here in Wales, your light will shine and not under the gallows. So without these people who kind of molded me and guided me, I wouldn't be having this conversation.
You'd find a way, I'm sure of that. Yeah. So that was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to open up the floor to some questions, but before that, I just want to say a big thank you to the University of Glasgow and especially Dr. Colin Hurd, who's here with us today for this series. It's collaboration with the Luxembourg Review. And next month, we have no more shows this month. We'll have Khalid Matawa and Valzina Mort coming in next month. So those are two very exciting poets to look out for. So yeah, can we open up the floor to any questions? I think if you can unmute yourself right now, and this can be a very sort of casual conversation.
I'm not taking any question from Sudeep.
You missed out. I had loads of stuff to ask you.
Okay, for the sake of peace.
You want me to say nice things first?
No, fire away, sir. You know, you.
I mean, it was a real treat to see the film again. I'm glad I saw it in silence without the rectangle box, gray box for them. You know, one of the things that struck me having read your work and having sort of read together and so on, you talk about the past and memory. Largely your work is past and memory and the fables from your land. Are you thinking of any other directions to forge ahead in terms of?
Yeah, well.
That's one. And the other related thing is, when I hear your plays and your poetry and your prose, when read aloud, it's difficult to distinguish the genre. That's because you have a particular kind of voice, beautiful, lilting voice. It's very difficult. So how do you decide what goes into a poetry book? What's it?
Well, to be honest with you, most of the things that every time I start writing, it starts as poetry, and then from there it just kind of takes off. In terms of where my writing is going in the future, I'll just have to tell you that I've just signed a contract with Serene Books, the biggest poetry publishers here in Wales. So for the first time, I'm actually bringing my own poetry collection, not some sort of an anthology. But also the second part is, again, answer your question as to where my writing is going. I have just signed a contract with a publishing house, not in Wales, but in England, for my first fiction. So it's entitled Wajeli, which means those who came. So whatever drum you play, I'll dance to it. If you want me to write about memory, the fountain of memory, I write on every subject. I write on every subject. So I'm like you. I follow your footsteps. And in terms of how do you distinguish these things, it depends. So if I want to add magical realism to it, I just go straight into Bakwiri. So this is the language that I'm most comfortable in. You know? And then if I want to do some sort of colonial rebellion, I go to Russian because I'm also comfortable in this language. English and French are colonial impositions. So I'm grateful that I can navigate myself through these languages, but my best language is Bakwiri.
Love how you sort of like Sudeep said, how you sort of flow between the different genres and the languages together. It's a real art form in that sense. So any more questions from anybody?
Yeah, it maybe carries on a little bit from that. I was really interested to hear about your approach to rhythm and music in your work, because it really came in your reading and in the video. It's so powerful, the rhythm. So I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts on rhythm and music.
Listen, there is a question. You know, can your poem if it's a poem, would the poem work if you remove all the musical elements in it? You see, let me tell you, to be honest with you, Colin Head. It's only when I was doing my master's in Abetawe that I started to understand rhythm and all of this. I just wrote, you know, I just wrote freely, and I was only started nurtured and guided in terms of the art of poetry during my master's degree, and this is the first time I studied creative writing. So now, when I'm writing, I have this conscious decision to make. How are my lines ending? So so studying creative writing has stifled my creativity a bit, but it's opened. It's got to be the art of writing. So yes.
Thank you.
Any more?
I'd like to ask a question. Sorry, I don't have a camera. Thank you so much for your readings. They were absolutely amazing. I really enjoyed the use of landscape in your work, and I'm interested to ask you just about kind of the different landscapes in Cameroon and in Wales and how they inform your writing, and is that something that like changes the rhythms and the way that you like to tell your stories?
Thank you very much for being with us. In terms of landscape, it plays an integral part, especially when I'm using memory, because I try to conjure everything that I see in Wales, and then I measure it up against what I saw growing up. So sometimes my daughter will ask me, "So, Dad, do you sleep at night?" My question to her is, "No, I do not sleep at night. Most of the time, most often, when I close my eyes, I follow the reins of my dream back to my broken landscape." You know, growing up, everything was perfect. But then when I went back to Cameroon in 2017, there was some sort of desolation. You know, yeah. So landscape plays, especially in terms of poetry, it plays a great role in terms of directions, because everything that I see, I compare it with other things. One of the most beautiful places that I saw, I thought it was when I went for my primary school in Jian in Mundimba. But in 2005, I visited a place in Wales called Griganog. Oh my God, I have never experienced such beauty. And most often than not, I travel to Griganog mentally to write poems about nature and stuff.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for answering.
And we have one last question, I think, before we have to head off. It's how do the poetic cultures and cadence of each country language play into how you write and what you write about, if they change, shift at all? And how do you know what language speaks out to you personally for any one poem?
Well, I'll put this thing for example, when I was in Russia and I was on the brink of death, someone introduced me to Alexander Pushkin's poem. And in this poem, there's a stanza that says, "Ya vas lubil, lubov yisho bitmoshen, udushe maya ogaslani sofsen." So I had loved you, and my love for you can repeat itself because it flows, it oozes. But if you translated this poem in English, you can see how rubbish it sounds, right? Okay. In Cameroon, we have this thing that we call Mbua Njoku, translated as elephant rain. But in Cameroon, if you say to somebody Mbua Njoku, it means the rain is so heavy, it feels as if elephants are falling on one's roof. So there are certain metaphors that only work in particular languages, and this is I make a lot of use of that. So in English, an apple is an apple, but in Russia you have yabluka, yabluchnoy, sveto yabluka. You know, it moves, it navigates. So it depends the kind of message that you want to put across. And I think that is the beautiful thing about languages. And one last thing, I make sure that wherever I find myself, I try to read as much poets from that area, and then that becomes a learning curve.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Eric. I think we'll end the show here. But thank you so much for joining us. Can we give a big round of applause to Eric and Ngalle Charles for joining us here? Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'll see you around sometime.
All right, Amara Chuku. Iron Lady, we are together.
Shazar, I'm just going to post a link in case anyone's interested to a reading on Friday with
Oh, perfect. Miss you. Yeah.
So I'll just put it in the chat. Thanks, Eric. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Colin, are you next week?
Hello? I think we seem to have lost. But there's a link here to this event that's coming up. When is it, Colin? On the 18th?
Friday the 18th, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. And it's free, and you should check out some of the creative conversations that the University of Glasgow Creative Writing Department are hosting this year. Absolutely incredible, and they're all free to join. And the link is there in at Twitter, right?
Yeah, or I can put it just now.
That's a wonderful, wonderful array of talent and writers over there as well. So thank you all for joining us. And I'll post up the link on the Luxembourg Review and my Twitter feed as well. Bye-bye.